a picture. Oh, live.
Hawadakiapi, Nick Tilsen Amachiapi, Trandea Washday Nampe Chuzapolo. My name is Nick Tilsen, Oglala Lakota, and checking in here from the NDN Collective headquarters here in the Chisapa.
Piveshev, Mene Wostatnanehav. My name is Krystal Tubles. I'm Oglala Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, the director of the Landback program here at NDN Collective.
We just first wanted to thank everybody for joining us. Hihani Washday, good morning to each and every one of you out there. Thank you for joining us and checking in with us. We wanted to make sure that we continue to provide updates about what's happening with the Landback movement, what's happening with NDN Collective, what's happening with the land defenders and the cases against us. For our efforts, and we definitely have felt the love and appreciation and support from folks all across the whole country, from folks in our own communities right around here, and I just wanted to make sure that we take the time to say thank you to each and every one of you, and that your prayers that you have lifted up have been felt, and as you know, as we fight for our land and as we fight these charges, that we don't feel alone. And we really don't feel alone, because we feel like we're part of a collective, and we feel like we're part of folks that are lifting up and supporting each and every one of us. So wanted to thank folks at this time for that, and then also provide updates about what's going on, because the judicial system is a facet of white supremacy and systematic racism, and it's confusing. And so we want to make sure we're able to unpack what's happening in the struggle.
Yeah, so basically what's going on with the land defenders and those of us that were arrested on July 3rd is that we all had initial hearing dates, and the first hearing dates were just simply going in and pleading not guilty, and then getting assigned attorneys, and then getting a dispositional conference set. And that's kind of where we're at. So we've gone through almost all of the land defenders. I think we had one person reschedule because they couldn't make it, but all of the land defenders have gone through their initial hearings so far. They've all been set, had dispositional hearings set for October 8th, and now we're in the process of just making sure everyone is taken care of, they're provided for. Everyone obviously pled not guilty because we're not guilty on our own lands, and that's kind of where we're at in the process. Following the dispositional hearing, there'll be another hearing. And so this is kind of a long, drawn-out process. And as Nick said, it's confusing. And we know that there was a lot of questions that were coming up with, if people were found guilty and things like that. But so we're not there yet. We're still in the very beginnings of this whole long, drawn-out, legal, white supremacist process, basically.
Yeah, and I know, and it's confusing too, like, because everybody's like, oh, they're going to court. Most of the time so far we've been going to court to even see, preliminary hearings to determine whether they even have enough evidence to even charge you. And then your arraignment is where you ask for a dispositional hearing, and then at that one, that you determine when your actual court date is. And so we'll keep folks updated on all of that. And I would say this, one thing about the whole process of it being so confusing, it's part of why they are doing this to us, right? They try to drag as a strategy that when we're fighting for our freedom and fighting for our liberation, they try to take up our time, drag us through this court process, trying to use fear-based tactics to do that. And so, that's just the reality of kind of where it's at, and where things are at with the charges against me are the same place, right? So we are they've added charges on, and are coming hard right now, and so I have a dispositional hearing coming up on September 11th, and then after that we'll get a court date. But my expectation, honestly, is that this potentially goes on for a while, because I think that there is a lot of video on both sides. There's a lot of discovery. There's a lot of things to be called. So I imagine that, and I know that the court system here in Pennington County is also trying to be careful around COVID, and so the court is delayed because of COVID too, and so I think there's this often the desire to try to move this along quickly as possible, but at the same time recognizing that this is the kind of the state of things. I would say that based on some of the things that we have heard out of the state's attorney's office, is there has definitely been threats to release warrants for additional arrests for people that have taken, that were part of the action that happened at Mount Rushmore. And I would anticipate, if they're threatening that, it usually means that that's probably what they're going to do, meaning that they're taking, collecting video from folks that were there who weren't arrested that day, but in an effort to then arrest them based on things that they find in video. And so, we wanted to make sure that we get that message out there to folks, not to instigate fear, but that, let's be real, they're very threatened by the movement we're building and are trying to attack all parts of it. And so the anticipation to that other arrests could be coming is a very real reality. And of course, in the case that happens, then we will help, we will reach out to those folks and try to provide support. And I wanted to say one more thank you to a lot of the folks who contributed and donated to the Black Hills legal fund, and that fund is being housed here at NDN Collective, and it is all of those resources are going to pay for lawyers to make sure that that the land defenders are properly represented in court. It's also making sure help pay for expenses for land defenders to be able to make it to their court, to make it to their court dates. All of the things in which we committed those resources to be going for is exactly what they're going for. And so just wanted to thank everybody for contributing. And there's a continued need for that. But we feel like we're resourced well to make sure that folks are represented, and we feel like that's part of in this movement. When folks are attacked in this way, it's important that we all collectively come together, and the creation of the Black Hills Legal Fund, it was a way to be able to do that. And so just wanted to say thank you to everybody out there who's contributed to that, because it's supporting us to be able to be represented in our work.
I want to add a little bit on to that as well. I continue to encourage folks to contribute to the Black Hills Legal Fund, and also just as someone who has been targeted before and criminalized for defending my lands and defending the right to have clean water and access to clean water, I've had a lawsuit against me by Energy Transfer Partners. And one thing I will say about going through that legal process is that not only is it financially taxing and is it taking your energy and your time, but also it's really emotionally draining. And so I just really am thankful for everybody who has reached out and contributed, care packages that have been sent, messages, people stopping by and just giving words of encouragement and all of that support, and just ask that you continue to support all of the land defenders through that, because not only do we bear the burden of the financial things, which we've been supported through the Black Hills Legal Fund and will continue to be supported through that, but we also bear the burden of the emotional burnout and the burden of carrying that, and it's heavy, and we're human beings, having this experience, and it's a weight that I think is often overlooked when we do this work. And we feel spiritually called to do this work. And so we just ask, for continued prayers, continued support in those ways as well, in addition to, supporting the legal fund and signing the petitions and all of those tangible ways of supporting. And so I just really, really appreciate everyone that has supported that's continuing to support through these moments.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, we wanted to make sure we give everybody an update on the legal stuff, but also to remind folks that that's not why we were here to fight the fight. The fight that we are fighting is to build a Landback movement, to return Indigenous lands back into Indigenous hands, and in the process tear down systems of white supremacy and racism that were created as mechanisms to steal our land and oppress our people in the first place. And so we kind of wanted to unpack, what Landback is, how we're sort of thinking about it at NDN Collective. Obviously, this is not something, Landback is not something Indian Collective created themselves. A Landback is like an energy and a spirit that has lived in every Indigenous person for generations. And this is, artists, well over 10 years ago, started coming up with Landback art. And, artists and culture bearers are the interpreters of our culture and the interpreters of what's happening in our society. And so if you look at like almost every narrative, it usually starts with artists in some way, shape, or form, and then makes its way, into movements and makes its way into our work. And so, I remember seeing Landback art, years ago, and patches and different things. And then, of course, as we think about connecting the younger generation and the older generation together in a joint effort for land defense and land back, it becomes a framework. And so, here at NDN Collective, we recognize that one of the powerful things about land back is it creates a narrative to bring our issues into now. And again, that was one of the purposes of the action that we took at Mount Rushmore, was that the Indigenous, that as we're having this national conversation about dismantling white supremacy in this country, and having this conversation about racial equity, racial justice, and what a better country and what a better world looks like in these historic times that we're in, we wanted to make sure that Indigenous people are not an afterthought, that we are not othered on our own lands like we have been for generations. And so, part of the action was to connect those things together. And then also coming right out and saying that the liberation of Indigenous people is directly connected to the liberation of all people, including our Black brothers and sisters, our Latinx brothers and sisters, our Palestinian relatives, all of our relatives throughout this country and throughout the world. And so Landback is a framework that we're building to be able to build a movement, not something that just lives within one organization, but to actually unleash the spirit that already exists within Indigenous people everywhere. And the collective role is to help build some of that, some of the organizing principles and some of the narrative, and to make sure that our people are resourced to not only fight but win. And so, we can talk a little bit more. Krystal here as the director of the Landback campaign that we're building and launching here at NDN Collective. And so, if you can talk a little bit about what that process and journey has sort of looked like so far.
Yeah, the July 3rd action was really powerful, and I think that everyone that was involved in that can really agree that it was a very spiritual experience, and that is what birthed Landback campaign in NDN Collective. But we come into this acknowledging and knowing that we come into a long legacy of organizing and activism of folks that have been on the ground and been on the front lines and sacrificing their freedoms and their time and their energy around Landback. And so we fully acknowledge that that's how we come into this. And also, we're in a very critical moment right now where we can actually catalyze on this moment with Landback, and as Nick was saying, insert this narrative into mainstream narratives so that we're no longer in the back of organizing the way that I feel like has been for a long time. In the Black Hills, getting the Black Hills back has been a fight for generations, and we're stepping into that as well. And we, like I said, we follow a long legacy of folks who have been doing that work. And our hopes is that we can just support that, and then also create a framework and create an organizing framework and a political framework and a narrative framework for folks to be able to continue to mobilize and to really connect us and bring our forces together. Because one of the things I truly believe is that we don't win these battles alone, and we definitely don't win the wars alone. And so we have to unite, and we have to come together for these struggles. And so as we're moving forward with Landback campaign, the Black Hills is our cornerstone, right? Because when we get our Black Hills back, we change the political landscape of what is possible for all Indigenous peoples to get their lands back as well. And that is what we're hoping to push forward with right now. And we're already working with groups. We're already moving on things. We have Kumeyaay territory who's down on the border battling the destruction of their lands and the destruction of burial sites. And they have a camp there right now, and they've named it Camp Landback. And so just, quick shout out to Camp Landback in Kumeyaay territory who's doing the work and throwing down. And our hopes is that we are able to find ways to support groups like that, to really make sure that they have the resources and the support and the experience and the tools that they need to fight back and to get stewardship back of their lands and to reconnect back to their lands. The other part about Landback campaign is that we keep talking about it in terms of it's so much more than a campaign, that it's really a larger framework. And so part of our framework and our belief with it is that we can trace back all of these things that we're experiencing in Indigenous communities and even communities of color as far as symptoms of oppression. And when I say that, I'm referencing suicide rates, alcoholism rates, lack of access to proper health care or to proper education, all of these things that are plaguing our communities. You can trace all of those things back to when we were forcefully removed from our lands. And then on top of that, all of the systems that were then built on top of those lands that continue to systematically oppress us and continue to uphold white supremacy were built on top of those stolen lands. And so for us, in order to dismantle white supremacy, in order to dismantle systems of oppression, in order to really, truly move forward for liberation for everybody, then we have to go back to the roots of things, and that is land back. And that has to be at the center. And so that's what we're really working towards. And that's the political framework and narrative that we're operating from with the Landback campaign.
Well, and I think the thing to add to that too is, since the very beginning of the creating of NDN Collective, our whole purpose has been to build Indigenous power and to shift the power dynamics and shift decision-making back into the hands of people who that has been taken from, and in this case, Indigenous folks. And so, part of the shift, the power structure shift that we're talking about within Landback is all of a sudden the conversations when Indigenous people are stewards of their own lands, the conversation around extractive and exploitive projects changes, especially because if they eventually have to, by us controlling our own lands, they eventually have to get free and prior informed consent of Indigenous people to be able to have these projects go across our lands. And so the amount of things that could be prevented because of the success of changing those power dynamics and getting back not only stewardship of land, but taking control of the governance systems that are overseeing the land as we know it. And so that's a really big fundamental part of this. I think that the other thing is, as Indian people, we're so overwhelmed by what's happening in our communities, whether it's the amount of suicides that are taking place in our community, the amount of poverty our people live in, the amount of struggle that our people have, that sometimes it's hard for us to articulate what we need because we feel overwhelmed and we feel like we're in survival mode. And so Landback is a narrative that we are building and leaning into because it's a way for us to vocalize and to communicate what needs to be changed in our communities. So Landback can be also, the work around improving education for our children, dismantling the prison industrial complex, dismantling the current state of capitalism as we know it and restructuring a different form of economy that's based on Indigenous values. Those are all things that are part of when we talk about Landback, and those are the things that are possible that when we change the power structures and get land back to our communities and to our people. It also creates a way for other people to be part of our liberation. And this gets into, you know, the next thing that we want to talk about, which is around, you know, the current climate of the country. And Landback creates a way for other people that are allies, accomplices, relatives, however you want to frame it. It creates a way for people to show up for Indigenous people, because this entire country has been built on Indigenous people's lands. So every form of oppression that's happening in this nation right now is happening on the lands of Indigenous people. And we recognize that as we fight for our land back, we actually want to also collectively build a world that works for all people. We want to make sure that black folks not only fight for but achieve reparations. We want to make sure that folks, Latinx folks, we want to make sure that all of our relatives across this country, that we're trying to build a world that works for everybody, and that these things actually can coexist, and that we're in this moment in history right now where many things are possible, and many things are possible in the convergence of these movements. And you know, the current political and movement moment that we are in has really been created by the leadership for the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, and it has created an on-ramp for so many things to systematically change here. And I think that we are beginning to lean in more and more about what collective liberation looks like, both short-term and long-term. We know that we're not going to resolve all of the tensions or conflicts that we have across all of these different movements, but we are at a time in this country where it is required for us to lean in, because there is a clear enemy. And you know, to be clear too, as we talk about the climate in the country and we talk about the need to get out to vote, the Democrats aren't going to save the day. That's not the issue. The question is, who do we want to be fighting, and how do we want that fight to look? And what gets us closer to liberation? And having a white supremacist in the White House that is perpetuating violence in this country right now and is attacking the very livelihood of everybody in this nation does not get us closer to liberation. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about how great the Democrats are, or that ticket is, but I will say that I do think that the livelihood of our people is at stake, and that we must vote, and that the pathway to liberation is much quicker by having leadership in this country that is not actively fighting specifically against every single thing that we stand for. And so, you know, that's a framework. And so, you know, I want to encourage folks to get out there to vote. I want to encourage folks that, you know, if you're 18 years old, get out there and vote and let your voice be heard. It's one of the ways that you can have power. I also want to encourage people to protect the right to vote. They are making an assault on our right to vote altogether, and they're assaulting people of color all throughout this nation. And there's, you know, for the first time in many, many years, we're going to see people blocking polls, trying to prevent people from voting. And so there's a thing that we have to come together as a people right now to build this. And this is the reality of the climate we are in this nation. And as scary as it is, at the same time, it's an opportunity for so much work towards collective liberation, and we can pivot these hard times that we are in to creating lasting change for our people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I think that, as Nick said, like we are on the verge, and we're in this moment of like moving into a revolutionary moment, like a true revolutionary moment. And I think that we need, as difficult and painful and heartbreaking as our current state is right now, I think we also need to reframe the way that we're looking at it, and look at it, just as Nick said, as an opportunity for us to like come together in these certain spaces, and for us to really hold each other's narratives and hold each other's visions for what liberation for everybody looks like. And I think that we're invested in that work with the Landback campaign. We're invested in building out those relationships, in relying and calling on all of the relationships that we've been building as individuals, as an organization over the years. And so we're really in a moment of calling on everybody. And, and we have some key dates that are going to be coming up. And so for folks to be tracking, the next few months are gonna be intense, and we have Indigenous Peoples Day coming up, and so continue to follow us and stay tuned for some announcements and some big things for that day. We have the elections coming up in November. We have some other things planned around that time. So there's a lot of exciting things happening right now, and we have to continue to stand together and continue to support each other and continue to show up, continue to be in the streets, continue to be ungovernable, continue to be in that place, so that way we can actually stand together united to demand and then to actually achieve what it is that we want for collective liberation.
Yeah, and I think that all of these moments are an opportunity to leverage the next, right? Change doesn't happen unless we demand it. Unless power doesn't get transitioned unless we go take it. And that's why, understanding whether it be voting or using these different mechanisms are just merely tools for our liberation. Our liberation isn't bound up in voting. Our liberation isn't bound up in these systems. That our liberation is bound up in us. And these are tools and mechanisms for us to be able to create the change that we're trying to seek, and that this is a historic moment. I mean, people keep talking about the historic moment that we're in, and that this is the most important election in a generation, and maybe ever. And to me, it's just one point in a trajectory of liberation for our people. And so this is required. It's a required time that we're in. And when we think about a Landback movement, and when we think about all the different ways in which people can participate, there's so many different ways. And I think that here at NDN Collective, we're going to keep going to work and rolling up our sleeves to find a way for everybody, whether you're a member of a treaty council, whether you're tribal council, whether you're grassroots organizers, moms, dads, children, aunties, uncles, all relatives. This is a spirit that already lives within us, because we have long wanted our land to be returned to our people. And so to us, it's about creating an inclusionary process and creating multiple forms of engagement. And we're going to keep rolling up our sleeves and going to work for this, while we continue to extend our hand and partner with other folks around collective liberation. And I think that there's some awesome things that are happening there. And I would encourage us as Indigenous people all over to really think, to take the time to really think that we're not going to achieve what we want to achieve in this world by just looking down, by just looking on our res, but that there's an opportunity here that if we see what's happening throughout this country, that we can actually see our liberation bound up in these different things. And I think it's important for us to think about that as an Indian people, and for us to broaden our horizons and recognize that we're in a historic moment, that folks want to show up for us and we want to show up for them. And so, just wanted to keep, saying that. We're going to begin to wrap up here, and again, wanted to say thank you to the folks who've been supporting our work, the folks who've been taking to the streets at this time, the folks who are everybody who's watching out there, and making sure that we're not being able to do this work in isolation. I also want to thank the folks that continue to keep us accountable to our communities and to our people, because we are not serving our people, we are of our people. We are of these movements and of our communities. And so, all of the things, and I just wanted to say, also a thank you to the generation who has come before us that have fought for our lands. We got to grow up in ceremonies because our parents' generation fought for that right. We didn't have to do our ceremonies in hiding because the American Indian movement fought for that right. We didn't have to do these things because of the sacrifices that people have made before us, and we recognize that. And there's such power in that generationalism that we have, and I think that was one of the things that is continuing to come up as a theme in this work, is connecting the multiple different generations together. And so I'm excited about where this work is heading for our communities and for our people.
Yep, definitely. I also want to add on to that a little bit of just Landback campaign, just as Nick referenced the generations that came before us and then us here presently. And also, like, we're invested in like youth showing up and youth getting engaged. And so I do want to take this moment to encourage young people to really take the time and to listen to these things and to ask themselves, like, what does being reconnected back to the land mean to you? What does white supremacy mean to you? Like, what do these things mean to you? And to really start to like have those conversations with your peers and ask us questions, ask the people around you questions, ask those things, because a lot of these systems that our young people are tied up in, they were not meant for them. And that's a tough place for them to be. And I know, because before I came here, you know, I did a lot of youth work and I continue to do that. But just know that Landback campaign is also, you know, we're also making space for young people's voices, and we're invested in these future generations, because when we are not here organizing, the youth are going to be there and they're going to be stepping up, and they already are. And so I just wanted to name that, and again, just echo what Nick said and really thank everyone and say Niya'ish for the support, and encourage you to continue to donate to the legal fund, you know, continue to sign the petitions so that way we can continue to have that support, and, you know, continue reaching out and continue to offer support and to the prayers for all of the land defenders, not just from the July 3rd action, but all of those that are out there right now, because there are people across Turtle Island everywhere that are throwing down right now actively. And we send our prayers and we send our support, and we will do our best to continue to show up for you as well.
And one more plug: if you're Indigenous out there, you're Native, and you're throwing down to protect your land, get a hold of us, because we want to throw down with you, and we want to support you, and we want to help you. We want to use whatever resources that we have and what is available to us to support those struggles. And so, you know, get a hold of us, follow us. And we'll continue to show up, because we, you know, folks who have interacted with NDN Collective before, like, we will throw down, and we will share our resources, and we will fight for your land with you, alongside with you, whether you're a grassroots organizer or a tribal leader, because we fight, because we believe in what we're fighting for. So thank you to each and every one of you out there, and everybody have a good rest of the day. Dok Shah Ke Wachi Ankik De.